everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we take these sometimes really complex topics and try to pull out the key insights, the stuff that really matters. So today we're going to be diving deep into bitter hop extract, NAG3-BHE3.
Right.
And we've got a really fascinating set of sources to work with. We've got this recent YouTube video where a naturopath named Nathan kind of goes deep into BHE3 and its effects on the body. And we've also got some material from Fix Wellness Journey. So our mission here is to really try to understand what this BHE3 is all about, how it works, what you can realistically expect in terms of its effects, especially for fat loss and just overall well-being, and then, how to actually maximize its benefits for you specifically. So let's get right into it, I guess, right off the bat with the name BHE3.
Yeah, and right away the name, it kind of sparks that question around that 3. What's that all about?
Yeah.
And according to Nathan, it seems that 3 likely refers to the 3 main bitter acids that are in hops. You've got the alpha acids, the beta acids, and the isoalpha acids.
Right.
So BHE3, it's not just a general hop extract. You think of hops, you might think of beer.
Right.
But this is really focusing on these concentrated bitter compounds.
Yeah, and that's a key distinction, right? Because Nathan pointed out that if you're talking about whole hop extract where you're using like the flower itself, that's been traditionally used in naturopathy for things like menopause, anxiety, sleep.
Oh, right.
But BHE3 really zeroes in on these specific bitter acids.
Exactly, and it's in that concentrated form where we start to see some really interesting mechanisms at play. So when you ingest BHE3, these bitter acids, they bind to receptors in your small intestine, in your gut. And what's really fascinating here is that this isn't just some local effect in your gut. This binding, it triggers a cascade of signals that travel all the way along the vagus nerve, that major communication pathway, directly to your brain.
Yeah, the vagus nerve, like the gut-brain superhighway.
Exactly.
Okay, so those signals are sent, then what?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. This signaling, it actually prompts your body to release its own gut peptides. And Nathan highlighted a few really important types.
Okay.
Some of these peptides have what's called a GLP-1-like action.
Okay.
And GLP-1, just to clarify, it's a hormone that helps regulate blood sugar and signals fullness. So this action contributes to appetite suppression.
Makes sense.
Other peptides that are released have what are called cholecystokinin-like effects.
Cholecystokinin?
Cholecystokinin. And cholecystokinin, it helps release digestive enzymes and signal satiety. So this aids in the breakdown of all your food proteins, carbs, fats, making digestion more efficient.
So it's not just about making you feel less hungry, it's also about helping your body actually process the food that you're eating more effectively.
Exactly. It's kind of like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
And the benefits, they don't stop there. These bitter acids, they also appear to enhance something called gastric motility and peristalsis.
Yeah.
Think of this as helping your food move more smoothly through your digestive tract, which can lead to better absorption of nutrients and, more regular bowel function, keeping things moving.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a really fundamental benefit just for overall gut health. But Nathan also talked about effects that kind of go beyond just the digestive system, right?
He did, and this is where it gets really intriguing. Because of that direct line of communication via the vagus nerve to the brain, there's potential for BHE3 to actually have a calming influence on mood and anxiety, which makes sense when you consider that well-established connection between gut health and mental well-being.
Great.
And then, even more intriguingly, there are suggestions of possible long-term cognitive benefits associated with these bitter acids.
It's really fascinating how this one extract seems to have the potential to really impact both our physical and mental landscapes. And of course, we can't leave out the aspect that often gets the most attention, which is the fat loss.
Absolutely, that's a big one. And BHE3, it appears to be linked to increased thermogenesis.
Yeah.
Which, as Nathan explained, is essentially the process where your body breaks down fat to generate heat. And this happens primarily in brown adipose tissue, and it can be a significant factor in reducing stored fat, particularly visceral fat, which is that deeper fat surrounding your organs, which is really, really important for your long-term metabolic health.
Right. And just to kind of recap there, so BHE3 targets visceral fat through this process called thermogenesis.
That's a key takeaway.
Okay, so we're starting to get a good grasp of, the mechanics of BHE3. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about what many of you are probably most interested in, which is fat loss. It's often the carrot, as Nathan put it, that gets people excited.
All
But
right.
it sounds like with BHE3, we're not talking about some sort of quick fix for fat loss, right?
Yeah, that's a really crucial point to highlight. While the idea of, rapid fat loss is tempting, The information we're seeing suggests that it generally takes around 12 weeks to really see those changes that are specifically linked to BHE3.
Mhm.
And there are good physiological reasons for this timeline. It's not just about, being patient. It's about understanding that your body has its own set of priorities that it needs to address first.
Right. So Nathan was saying that before your body's even ready to release that stored visceral fat, which, by the way, often contains a lot of toxins,
Right.
it needs to kind of address other underlying issues.
Exactly. Like what? Well, this might include things like reducing inflammation, supporting that gut lining, making sure your detoxification processes are working well, managing your stress levels, and improving your sleep quality. These are often prerequisites for your body to feel safe enough to really let go of that stored fat in a lasting way.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like your body saying, okay, let's get these internal systems running smoothly before we start focusing on shedding this excess baggage.
Exactly.
And it's important to remember, too, that any initial weight changes that you might see, let's say you start a new protocol, they're not always just fat loss, right?
That's true. You could initially lose water weight. You might lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
You could even be losing some structural fat. But the indications are that BHE3 seems to be more targeted towards that metabolically active visceral fat.
Now, what about people who do experience quicker changes? Like they see something shift in the first few weeks, like 2 to 6 weeks. Is that a common thing?
Yeah, Nathan suggested that if you see some more rapid changes early on, it could be due to the loss of fat that was gained more recently. Like your body might be less resistant to releasing those newer fat stores.
Okay.
But that more established fat, sometimes that really toxin-laden fat, that tends to be more stubborn.
It's holding on for dear life.
Yeah. And it requires a more optimized internal environment for your body to really feel safe releasing it.
So patience is definitely key here. Like even if the scale isn't showing dramatic changes right away, there are probably other positive things happening internally, right?
Absolutely. As Nathan highlighted, even without immediate scale changes, you're likely experiencing things like reduced inflammation, improved sleep patterns. These are significant signs that the BHE3 is having a positive impact, even if it's not instantly reflected in your weight or body measurements.
And it sounds like the fat loss that we might see with consistent BHE3 use could be more sustainable long term.
Yeah, that's the potential. Because it's not a stimulant that's kind of forcing your body to release fat in this unsustainable way, it doesn't seem to carry that rubber band effect, where you lose the weight, but then as soon as you stop using it, it all comes back.
Right.
When it's combined with healthy lifestyle habits, it appears to support more lasting changes in body composition.
And, we can't underestimate how important it is to reduce that visceral fat for our overall health.
Absolutely. It's not just about aesthetics. Visceral fat, it's metabolically active, and it contributes significantly to various health concerns. So even just a modest reduction, like losing a single kilo of visceral fat, can have a really positive impact on your overall risk factors.
So now this might be a point of frustration for some people, like you're doing everything right, you're taking the BHE3, but those scale and measurement changes seem to be lagging behind. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, and Nathan explained a couple of key reasons for this, and they make a lot of sense. So firstly, when fat cells break down and release their contents, they actually temporarily attract and hold on to water.
Really?
Yeah, so you might be losing fat mass, but this temporary water retention within those cells, it can kind of mask the actual fat loss on the scale or with measurements, and eventually your body will release that excess water.
Okay.
It's like, imagine these little fat cells. They're like these tiny water balloons. They break down, they release their contents, but they're still holding on to some of that water, which can kind of throw off those measurements.
Yeah, that's a really helpful image.
And secondly, if you have a significant amount of what's called subcutaneous fat, which is that fat just under your skin, even if you're successfully reducing the visceral fat around your organs, the overall circumference of, let's say, your waist or your hips, it might not change noticeably until more of that subcutaneous fat is also addressed.
So it's a reminder not to get too fixated on those external measurements. And speaking of which, the Fix Wellness Journey materials really seem to echo that perspective, really emphasizing that it's a gradual process, not an overnight solution, and that consistency and a positive mindset are super important, like acknowledging and celebrating those smaller victories like reduced cravings or better sleep. That becomes really key.
Absolutely. They really emphasize that each person's body is unique and it's going to respond at its own pace. So some individuals might notice subtle shifts within days, while for others, those more visible physical results might take several weeks. The core message, though, is to stay consistent, stay committed to the process, and pay attention to how your body's feeling.
You're really tuning in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about how BHE3 works, what to expect, and now let's get practical. How do we actually use this stuff?
All right, so when it comes to maximizing the benefits, Nathan shared some really specific recommendations.
Okay.
And starting with the optimal way to take it, he recommends taking it in a small amount of water first thing in the morning. The goal here is to ensure that it actually reaches and binds to those receptors in the small intestine rather than being absorbed sublingually, like under your tongue.
Right.
And he also recommends following it with more water to kind of help it move through your system.
So you're really targeting the gut.
That's where the magic happens, so to speak.
And what about the timing in relation to meals? Should we be taking this before, after, with?
Well, he actually suggests taking it before meals, kind of similar to how traditional bitters are used.
Interesting.
And this timing, it could potentially stimulate digestion by encouraging the release of digestive enzymes in your gut, kind of priming your system for that meal.
Okay, so it's not just about the extract itself. It's about how it's working in synergy with your body's natural processes.
Exactly.
Now, we talked about a potential second dose, and Nathan mentioned something about a 9-hour window of thermogenic activity.
Right.
So how should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, so while the thermogenic effect of BHE3 might have a duration of around 9 hours, it's not necessarily a constant peak throughout that entire time.
Okay.
And considering that our metabolic activity is generally higher during the day, he recommends a second dose approximately 6 to 7 hours after your first.
Got it.
So, for example, if you took your initial dose at 6 a.m., a second dose around 1 p.m. could be beneficial.
Okay.
You're kind of aligning it with your body's natural daytime metabolic processes.
Right.
And he specifically advised against taking it in the evening.
Yeah, I remember that. Why is that?
Because while you do continue to burn some fat at night, your body's primary focus during sleep is really on detoxification and repair processes, not on high levels of thermogenic activity.
Right.
So taking BHE3 earlier in the day seems to be more advantageous for supporting that fat-burning process.
Okay, now beyond the timing of when we're taking the extract, what other lifestyle factors should we be paying attention to if we're really looking to maximize the effects?
Well, water intake is a huge one. Nathan, he really emphasizes the importance of adequate hydration, and he recommends aiming for a daily intake of 40 milliliters of water per kilogram of your body weight.
Okay.
That might sound like a lot to some people, but it's essential for efficient breakdown of fat and also for the effective removal of those toxins from your body.
Makes sense.
And he specifically recommends filtered water to minimize any potential contaminants.
Right. Getting rid of those impurities as much as possible. And sleep, of course, is always a foundation.
Always. Always. Prioritizing good quality sleep, ideally aiming for a bedtime between 9 and 9:30 p.m., that's going to be crucial for your overall health and for supporting your body's natural detoxification pathways.
And of course, we can't forget about diet. You can't really out-supplement a bad diet.
You can't. You can try, but it's not going to be as effective.
Right.
Nathan, he used this analogy of trying to dig a hole in the sand. The BHE3 can certainly help. But if you're constantly filling that hole back in with unhealthy food choices, you're kind of working against yourself.
Right. 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Exactly. And he mentioned Dr. Gundry's plant paradox as a resource for dietary considerations, particularly the idea of lectin avoidance.
Okay.
And, well, individual dietary needs can vary. I think the general principle of focusing on whole, unprocessed foods, that's pretty fundamental.
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked about optimal usage, key lifestyle factors. Now let's address some common questions that might be coming up for you. And also, let's talk about those subtle indicators that progress is happening, even if the scale isn't the first to show it.
Yeah, and that's so important because we don't want to get discouraged if we're not seeing those immediate changes on the scale.
Right.
Nathan explained that you might actually see improvements in areas like inflammation, sugar cravings, and sleep quality before you notice significant fat loss. And again, this comes down to your body's priorities. It's working to restore balance and address those fundamental imbalances first. So these initial improvements, they're actually really encouraging signs that your body's responding in a positive way.
And he also clarified something that I think a lot of people, especially women, might be wondering about, and that is that BHE3 is not a phytoestrogen.
Right. He made that very clear.
Yeah.
He explained that the extraction process for BHE3 primarily focuses on those bitter acids, And the components that are typically associated with phytoestrogenic activity in whole hops, like things called isoflavones and flavones, those are largely removed.
Okay.
So it doesn't have those direct hormonal effects in the way that phytoestrogens do. But it's worth noting that by addressing factors like stress, inflammation, insulin resistance, and oxidative stress, BHE3 can indirectly support overall hormonal balance.
Right. It's creating that internal environment where your hormones can function more optimally.
Exactly.
And then Nathan provided this, I don't know, it was almost like an epic list of potential indicators that positive changes are happening in your body.
It was a long list.
It was
He drew from observations from a doctor named Dr. Ben, and also feedback from individuals who are actually using BHE3. And this list included things like feeling fuller more quickly, naturally eating smaller portions, experiencing less hunger overall, having increased energy levels and stamina, noticing changes in your bowel regularity, either becoming more or less frequent as needed, smoother digestion with less discomfort, reduced bloating, potentially seeing lower blood pressure readings, experiencing easier breathing, enjoying better and more restful sleep, less snoring, a reduction in chronic pain, and even autoimmune-related issues, improved blood sugar levels, enhanced mental clarity, better focus and memory recall, fewer headaches and neck pain, an uplifted mood, reduced feelings of stress and anxiety, noticing that your clothes fit differently, an overall reduction in body size, decreased inflammation, feeling physically stronger, and even improvements in the appearance of your skin and hair. Like, it was really quite comprehensive.
wow. It really does highlight that the impact can go way beyond just changes in weight.
Right. It's about overall well-being.
Now, what about the opposite scenario? Let's say someone starts taking BHE3 and they actually experience a slight weight gain or some bloating.
Yeah, that can happen.
What might be going on there?
Well, Nathan suggested that a temporary increase on the scale is often due to water retention. So as your body's starting to process and eliminate those toxins, it might temporarily hold on to water to help dilute them, and that can lead to a slight increase in fluid, particularly within those fat cells.
Okay.
And then bloating, he mentioned that could potentially be linked to a higher intake of dietary fats, because BHE3 can influence gastric emptying. So if your body's not yet efficiently producing enough enzymes and bile acids to fully break down a large amount of fat, it could lead to digestive discomfort and bloating.
I see.
His advice was to monitor your fat intake and maybe distribute it more evenly throughout the day.
Okay.
And if those issues persist, consulting with a healthcare professional to assess for potential enzyme or bile acid deficiencies might be a good step.
So it's not necessarily a cause for concern right away.
Right, but it's something to pay attention to.
And Nathan also recommended that we consider using a wellness tracker, which I have to admit I'm not always the best at, but it makes so much sense.
It's a great tool. By documenting your baseline symptoms, things like your sleep quality, bowel movement regularity, energy levels throughout the day, your daily water intake, you'll be much better equipped to notice those gradual, subtle improvements over time that you might otherwise overlook.
Yeah, those small wins that we tend to just kind of brush past sometimes.
Exactly.
Finally, let's talk about long-term use of BHE3, because it sounds like this isn't just something that you take until you hit a certain number on the scale and then you're done, right?
Right. There's so much more to it than that. Given its effects on gut health, inflammation levels, sleep quality, stress management, reduction of visceral fat, and even those potential cognitive benefits, long-term use could offer ongoing support for your overall well-being and potentially play a preventative role in conditions that are linked to these underlying factors.
So it's really about cultivating a state of wellness rather than just chasing a specific outcome.
Exactly. And Nathan suggested a potential maintenance approach. Once you've achieved your desired health outcomes, you could experiment with reducing your intake to 1 serving per day and then increasing it back to 2 if you notice those initial issues starting to return.
Interesting.
He also mentioned that they're working on a tincture bottle, which will likely offer more flexibility in adjusting your dosage.
Okay, cool. So to kind of wrap this all up, it seems like what we've discovered in this deep dive is that BHE3 works in this really fascinating way by influencing the gut-brain connection, and it offers this wide array of potential benefits that go way beyond just fat loss. And achieving noticeable results, especially in terms of fat reduction, that typically requires consistent use and a degree of patience.
It's a journey.
It is, and it really works best when it's integrated with those healthy lifestyle choices. You know, the water, the sleep, the good diet. It's also important to remember that everyone's experience is going to be different. It's truly a journey towards improved wellness, not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. Your mileage may vary, as they say.
Exactly. So as you navigate this journey, be sure to really pay attention to those subtle improvements in your overall well-being, not just the number on the scale.
It's about the whole picture.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought for you to consider as you move forward. Knowing now how BHE3 interacts with your body in these really multifaceted ways, beyond just the number on the scale, what aspect of your well-being are you going to be paying the closest attention to in the coming weeks as you explore this further?
What are you curious about?
Exactly. We encourage you to continue diving deep into this topic on your own, do your own research, and connect with others who are on a similar path. There are lots of great resources and communities out there.
Yeah, share your experiences, learn from each other.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into BHE3.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.